widely celebrated author, an astute politician, a top diplomat, and an award-winning author of over 16 books, including Pax India and An Era of Darkness to his name, Shashi Tharoor is a keen student of both politics and history. His first work of fiction, The Great Indian Novel, a historical satire, is considered a classic commentary of Indian political history and has been reprinted nearly 45 times. As a Lok Sabha MP, he represents the Thiruvananthapuram constituency. Currently the chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs, he was earlier the Minister of State for Human Resource Development and Minister of State for External Affairs. At the UN, he also served as the Under Secretary General under Kofi Annan. He's a youth icon and someone I'm personally very excited to listen to. Presenting to you, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. This session will be moderated by Mr. T.K. Arun, Senior Editor at The Economics Times.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm supposed to give you guys a lecture, so you're getting one. But we will have a talk, a Q&A afterwards. I am happy to be back at the Times Litfest here. And the topic they've given me is New India, a blueprint for a progressive India. Now, there's certainly a buzz around this phrase, New India. I don't know, my friend Jayant Sinha used it when he was addressing you a few minutes ago. But it's certainly in no small part due to the efforts of our current Prime Minister, who made it a point to stress this slogan during his address to the nation from the ramparts of the Lal Killa on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of India's independence. In fact, as many observed, he's reported to have used the phrase 10 times in 1 hour. Or in other words, as the old saying goes, every speaker has his moment, but the problem is that most of them stretch that moment for 1 full hour. Given that I'm going to speak to you only for about 20-25 minutes before taking your questions, you won't be facing that problem today. But I will use New India at least 10 times just to keep up with the PM. Now, what is this New India that he's urging us to create? The Prime Minister spoke of an India free from the shackles of casteism and communal tension, an India that successfully solves its endemic problems of corruption, nepotism, and terrorism, an India where every woman, man, and child would be given an empowered and dignified standard of living, thanks to a society that harnesses India's entrepreneurial spirit to become an economic powerhouse. But as usual, between the rhetoric and the reality, there falls a great shadow. For all these statements and ideals, which one can find very little to disagree with, one is struck by the complete lack of any idea of how our country is going to achieve any of this. On the contrary, the road to New India appears littered with the wreckage of all that was good and noble about the old India. Whether it is the Achhe-Din of 2014 or the New India of 2017, under the present government, these phrases appear a mere subterfuge, a smokescreen for the real agenda of New India that this government has pursued since coming to power 3 years back. Now, it's understandable that for a congressman to stand before you and say this may sound to some like an extension of the customary negative politics that is prevalent in our country. But to address the elephant in the room, the fact is that under the Prime Minister's watch, the key indicators of New India that he ostentatiously laid out before the nation in his Independence Day address have in reality deteriorated. As a progressive Indian, I too want a new India, but not his kind of New India. In the first 3 years of the current government, as many feared when they first came to power, a new brand of intolerant politics, one that capitalizes on the chauvinistic tendencies of members of the ruling dispensation, has begun to consume our society. Though the PM has spoken about putting India first, it's become clear that his party and its followers put some Indians first and last. Their New India is an India where narrow-minded majoritarianism prevails. Since the party came to power, incidents of communal violence have proliferated, driven by mob lynching and Gaurakshak vigilantes. Human beings have been assaulted and killed in the name of cow protection. Muslims and Dalits have been particularly victimized. The father of an Air Force Havildar, a 15-year-old boy returning from Eid shopping, a dairy farmer transporting cows with a license, Dalits doing their job of skinning a dead cow, have all been casualties of this new India. 4 liberal and rationalist writers critical of the Sangh Parivar have been murdered. And yet, instead of strongly condemning the elements that have inspired such events, which is the least the government could do to actually help the country move towards this new India ideal of a country free of communal violence, BJP leaders have made disparaging remarks, either belittling the gravity of the communal tensions or even worse, pretending that nothing untoward is actually taking place. This has provided encouragement for these elements to continue with their targeted activities of barbarity and communal violence with complete disregard to the harmony of Indian society. The BJP's political and ideological allies openly deliver speeches that border on hate speech, divide us into Ramzadeh and Haramzadeh, advocate ideas like mass conversions and the elimination of beefeaters, and ask the PM's critics to go to Pakistan. I mean, why Pakistan? If you want to send your critics far away, why not suggest Canada? Right? But there is also a message in the choice of target. If you're a critic of this government, you must either be a Muslim or a Muslim lover, go to Pakistan. Now, the government doesn't lift a finger at such things as said. 2 of the people I've just quoted are actually members of the Council of Ministers. On the contrary, under the BJP, dissent is portrayed as seditious, protests are anti-national, and free speech is censored through economic pressure on media owners and outright political intimidation, all of which are illustrations of the petty intolerance and bigotry that passes for a ruling ideology in today's times. If anything, their new India is one that we must stand up to and resist at all costs. Even the economy has faced the impact of the failures of the current government. When the BJP arrived in New Delhi in 2014, it was the promise of "Achhe din aane wale hain" that got them there. Fast forward to 2017, and people are openly saying, "Bure din wapas le aao na." The "Achhe din" sloganeering has met the reality of the economic doldrums we find ourselves in. 3 years of economic mismanagement has witnessed a 2.2% fall in the GDP growth rate, and successive economic policies that have hit our country, notably the demonetization disaster and the wrecking of a great idea through the inept implementation of the GST. All the available data proves that demonetization was an unmitigated disaster, ill-conceived, unprepared, and poorly implemented, a case of all pain, no gain. GST would have been beneficial if it had really been one nation, one tax. Instead, the BJP took the UPA's design for a sleek horse and produced an ungainly camel. Not one nation, one tax, but one nation, 3 taxes, 6 GST rates. Such missteps have had a far-reaching negative impact on our economy. Micro and small enterprises have closed down. Daily wage workers have been thrown out of work. Manufacturing and job creation are both down. Trade has slumped. No wonder they're talking of New India when they made such a mess of old India. As I said, I want a new India too. It will be a new India where you don't get lynched for the food you eat, marginalized for the faith you hold dear, criminalized for the person you love, and imprisoned for making use of fundamental rights guaranteed by your own constitution. Instead, we must look forward to a new India that celebrates and welcomes pluralism, an idea vindicated by history itself. The organizers asked me to outline a blueprint for a new India, for a progressive India. To me, this new India must be fundamentally rooted in the idea of India that our founding fathers believed in. After all, as I've asked in a different context in the same festival last year, if you don't know where you're coming from, how will you appreciate where you're going? So this nebulous idea of India, though the phrase is Rabindranath Tagore's, is in some form or another arguably as old as antiquity itself. Nehru saw our country as an ancient palimpsest. I don't know if you all know what a palimpsest is. Imagine if you come and write on a wall, and he comes and writes on top of what you've written without erasing what you've written, and then she comes and writes on top of what he's written, and all these layers are there. That's a palimpsest. And this is what Nehru saw India as being, a land where successive rulers and subjects had inscribed their visions without erasing what had existed previously. We not only coexist like that, but we also thrive in our diversity, which is our strength. Swami Vivekananda spoke of a Hinduism that doesn't merely tolerate other faiths, but accepts them as they are. He said, we've taught the lesson of acceptance, not just toleration. This acceptance of difference has been key to our country's survival, making unity in diversity the most hallowed of independent India's self-defining slogans. India, as I've always argued, or at least for as long as I've been writing, has always been more than the sum of its contradictions. The Indian idea is that a nation may endure differences of caste, creed, color, culture, conviction, cuisine, costume, and custom, and still rally around a consensus. And that consensus is around the simple idea that in a diverse democracy like ours, you don't really need to agree all the time, so long as you will agree on the ground rules of how you will disagree. That, it seems to me, is where we have actually been able to survive for 70 years. The idea of an ever land, if I can stand Peter Pan on his head, emerging from an ancient civilization, united by a shared history, sustained by pluralist democracy. And this democracy imposes no narrow conformities on its citizens. The whole point of Indian pluralism is that you can be many things and one thing. You can be a good Muslim, a good Keralite, and a good Indian all at once. The Indian idea is the opposite of what the Freudians call the narcissism of minor differences. I remember in my UN days when I was dealing with the savage civil war in Yugoslavia, a lot of these Freudians came out of the woodwork and started writing about the narcissism of minor differences. These were all descended from the same Slavic tribes that had settled the Balkans in the 7th century. And here they were busy butchering each other, raping each other, violating each other. For what? Out of essentially very minor differences. Now, in India, on the other hand, we celebrate the commonality of major differences. So the idea of India has to be one land embracing many. For this new India to succeed and thrive, it'll have to embrace an inclusive vision and draw its inspiration from the key tenets of the core idea of India. Only by maintaining a commitment towards this democracy and this pluralistic ethos can New India be able to fulfill the aspirations of all Indians. Did someone say, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas? That's the idea. At the same time, we must also be conscious that preserving our ideological commitment to pluralism, acceptance, and the freedom provided by our democratic systems is only one half of the battle. Providing a decent standard of living to the people of India, particularly those from economically vulnerable groups, is the second commitment that we must undertake in our blueprint for a new India. Our inclusive vision of New India must be complemented by the inclusive development of all our peoples as we move forward. We can talk of a new India, and yet many of the battles India has been fighting and must continue to fight continue to center around our principal basic problems, which haven't totally changed yet. Roti, kapda, and makan. Not everyone has it yet. And of course, we've gone on to bijli, sadak, and pani. Electricity, good roads, clean drinking water. Most of our country still doesn't have it. And now we're in the process of adding broadband to that list of basics, right? Because in a land where a majority now has a mobile phone, 4G is far more important than Modi ji. Now, the prestigious Forbes magazine list of the world's top billionaires had to make room for 90 Indian dollar billionaires in 2015, with a combined net worth of $295 billion, which is greater than the GDP of a majority of the member states of the United Nations. But at the same time, we have 363 million people living below the poverty line. And it's not the UN World Bank poverty line of $1.25 a day, it's the Indian poverty line, which in rural areas is still 32 rupees a day. In other words, a poverty line that's been drawn just this side of the funeral pyre. This is our reality, and this is what our blueprint for a new India must address, creatively, quickly, and securely. New India must be built on the liberalization we embarked upon in 1991. Economic growth remains vital to pulling people out of poverty. But the fruits of that growth, the revenues that come from it, must be shared with those who are excluded from its benefits. The magic of the market will not appeal to those who cannot afford to enter the marketplace. As India navigates its development, we must focus on ensuring that the benefits of growth are shared across the nation by our youth who are struggling to find jobs and by our poorest for whom development would be life-changing. Any discussion about New India, indeed, about India's future, centers on India's youth. After all, who else are we building a new India for, if not for the young? We've trained world-class scientists and engineers, but 431 million of our compatriots are still illiterate. We have more children who have never seen the inside of a school than any other country in the world has. We have a great demographic advantage of 65% of the population under 35, half of our population under 25, 287 million in that age group of 10 to 22, just poised to come in and really make a difference in our society. This is potentially a youthful, dynamic, energetic labor force that could deliver to India a demographic dividend that very few other countries can match. China, Japan, even South Korea are facing a serious demographic squeeze, and the rest of the world is aging. In Europe, the average age will be 46 by 2020. In Japan, it will be 47. In America, which is this image of this youthful, immigrant-fueled America, it's going to be 40 in 2020, and under Trump, there'll be fewer immigrants coming in as well to lower that average. In India in 2020, it'll be 29 years of age. India's youth should not only be part of India's development, they should drive it. Now, this requires us to provide them with both education and employment opportunities on an unprecedented scale. The last budget, however, had no schemes for youth employment except the unsuccessful old skill development scheme, which isn't making much headway, I'm sorry to say. And ignoring the problem has only made matters worse each year. Young people may be celebrated as Bhagya Vidatas by our Prime Minister, but the current reality is one of shrinking opportunities without much Bhagya. Record lows in job creation are compounded by the negative effect of demonetization and the rushed implementation of GST. The PM's target of creating 2 crore jobs a year have no grounding in harsh reality. His own government's figures show just over 1 lakh jobs created a year. That's 0.5%, half of 1% of his target, of his own declared target. So it's no wonder then that in a recent survey, 70% of young people said they're anxious about their job situation and prospects. Development cannot be the preserve just of older generations. New India cannot be the plaything only of old Indians. Achieving inclusive development also rests on the government working for its poorest citizens. It's painful to see their struggles exploited for political gain. Promises are made in abundance during desperate election campaigns with little thought for their realization. When the dust settles, they are left as observers to economic growth. In India, our policies are supposed to be chosen in a democracy, right? So when Parliament soon reopens, we must remember that every MP in the Lok Sabha currently represents a constituency where a majority of his or her voters live on less than $2 a day. That's a mathematical fact. Over 70% of our constituencies has a majority where people live below $2 a day. So it's the highest responsibility of an MP to serve his constituents, to ensure the government acts to provide them with opportunities as India grows. But the exploitation of the poor we see today seems to continue beyond elections. They're even abused as part of government projects for the purpose of ostensibly meeting targets. A UN special rapporteur, many of you may have read this in the newspapers last week, recently reported after a trip to India that public authorities are coercing individuals into building and using toilets by threatening to revoke their ration cards. We cannot claim to be helping the poor if we are treating their human rights as dispensable, free to be traded for the purpose of fulfilling individual policy aims. No matter how much it needs to be done, for those affected, sanitation is certainly not a substitute for food. Until their needs and rights are considered in a holistic way for every policy made, we cannot hope to include them in India's development. Ad hoc policies to improve the opportunities available for India's poorest and youth are clearly insufficient for the size of the problem we're facing in the present, let alone growth in the future. We've got to also protect people from the adverse effects of other policies. We need grown-up economic management, not slogans and sound bites. Policies must be conceived in consultation with all stakeholders and implemented carefully in coordination with everyone affected to ensure that ill-thought plans do not cause inadvertent harm to our economy and especially to the most economically vulnerable. Leaving aside the ineffectiveness of demonetization, the removal of 86% of our currency from the Indian economy overnight disproportionately affected the poorest Indians. The richest always find their way around these things. Farmers, daily wage laborers, street vendors, who all rely on the informal economy, were most at risk. And so the lack of due planning, printing enough notes, printing small notes, fixing the ATM calibration, all of that stuff, the lack of planning was not just inconvenience, as the Prime Minister airily put it, but actually affected their lives, affected their livelihoods. In many cases, in 135 cases, it took their lives. This policy was intended or sold as affecting the rich, but insufficient thought was given to its impact upon the poor. And then they were told to go digital. It's like taking 86% of the blood out of a human being and asking him to dance. Now, we may yet be able to address our staggering economic challenges if our leaders develop the capacity to look at the bigger picture. Even during the best phases of our growth in recent years, growth was never only about per capita income figures or enabling businesses. It was always a means to an end. And the ends we cared about were the uplift of the weakest sections of our society, the expansion of possibilities for them, the provision of decent health care and clean drinking water, and those ends remain. Whether we grow by 9% as we once did under UPA or by 5.7% as we seem to be doing now in the last quarter, our fundamental commitment must be to the bottom 25% of our society. So what is the animating idea of our new India? It is the idea of one nation made up of many different kinds of people. An India where it doesn't matter what religion you practice, what language you speak, what caste you were born into, what color your skin is. In our new India, it should only matter that you are Indian. Our new India must be an India that respects all religions, all faiths, all beliefs, all cultures, all languages, all regions, all castes, and all classes. That simple idea of acceptance of difference, that idea of India, is under threat today from those who seek not just to rule India, but to change India's very heart and soul. What we want in India is unity. What they want is uniformity. We believe in an India that unites our people. They seek to divide us. Our ideology binds our people together. Theirs separates one Indian from another. What we need in a new India is the strengthening of democratic institutions at all levels, with transparency and accountability enforced through the Right to Information Act and an active parliament. They seek to weaken these institutions, hollow out the RTI, disregard parliament, and promote one-man rule. What we require in our new India is a leadership that empowers people and harnesses their collective strength in the pursuit of national objectives, not someone who sees people as instruments of his own power. Our new India must derive its support and strength from all sections of our diverse society. Their new India speaks of one faith and reduces others to second-class status. Their idea of new India is one of exhortation. Make in India, digital India, start-up India, stand-up India, sit-down India. Our new India must be one of consultation. We must never speak of India shining without asking who India is shining for. Our new India must follow policies that both promote higher economic growth and also ensures that the benefits of our growth are enjoyed by the poor and disadvantaged sections of our society. The choice is clear. We can have a new India that belongs to all of us, led by a government that works for all of us, or we can have a new India that belongs to some and serves the interests of a few. You can choose a new India that embodies hope or one that promotes fear. You can support a new India united in striving, or an India divided by hatred. I believe we can look forward to a new India with confidence, if not with optimism. But we must build New India on solutions to our major challenges. We have to overcome our poverty. We have to deal with the hardware of development, the ports, the roads, the airports, all the infrastructural progress we need to make. And we also need to deal with the software of our development, the human capital, the need for the ordinary person in India to be able to have a couple of square meals a day, to be able to send his or her children to a decent school, and to aspire to work in a job that will give them opportunities in their lives to transform themselves. We have to tackle and end corruption. We need to conquer these challenges, real challenges which none of us in India can pretend don't exist. But it must take place in an open society, in a rich and diverse and plural civilization, in one that's open to the contention of ideas and interests within it, that's unafraid of the prowess or the products of the outside world, that's wedded to the democratic pluralism that is India's greatest strength, and that's determined to liberate and fulfill the creative energies of our people. We must remain faithful to the founding values of our 20th century leaders if we are to conquer the challenges of the 21st and build the new India that we seek. Our new India will shine, but it must shine for all. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.
Thanks for that inspiring speech. You ended on corruption. Let me begin with a question on corruption. Now, there is corruption all over the world. The trouble with corruption in India is that it is systemic. We in India are proud of a democracy, but we do not fund our democracy. When did anybody sitting in this hall give a donation to a political party?
Did anyone?
Our politics is funded almost exclusively by the proceeds of corruption, by money taken off the books of companies and handed over to political leaders without a receipt. This is the source of corruption in this country. Politics is expensive. Huge political parties have to function across the country. Party workers have to be paid. Campaigns have to be financed. You have to print posters, you have to hold rallies, the publicity material. This costs money. Where is this money coming from? There is no transparency, there is no accountability. All the books are fixed, they are crooked, they are false. This can end only if our campaign finances become transparent. If every penny that a party spends or a political leader spends can be traced to where it came from, its origin. So, does this vision of a new India also include a new way of financing our politics?
It's a very, very good question. And there is really no easy answer, because you're absolutely correct. It's not just that the system starts off with that level of political corruption, it's also the hypocrisy undergirding it. We have these very low election expense limits, for example, which are known by everybody to be unrealistic. But if you ever raise the idea of raising them, you'll be told, oh, no, then it'll look as if politics is only the preserve for the rich. Everyone knows that actually you need more money than that, but you're not supposed to officially have it, which means, in effect, that unaccounted money becomes required. Secondly, even things like MP salaries. I mean, I find this quite hilarious. When I came from the United Nations to join Indian politics, my initial salary as a minister of the government of India was 16,000 rupees. The person typing my letters was getting 65,000 a month, but my salary was 16. As an ordinary MP, oh, by the way, then the salary was raised 3 years later. It was tripled to 50,000. And there was such an outcry. Many of you may even have forwarded the emails and WhatsApps and so on that went around decrying how our politicians are tripling their salaries. But that 50,000 rupees that I'm getting today, I have to maintain an office in my constituency, a home in my constituency, an office in Delhi, staff in both places, vehicles in both places. I have to pay electricity bills, phone bills, stationery, office expenses in both places. I have to pay for petrol in both places. I have to provide chai to visitors in both places. That's not going to come out of 50,000 rupees. And yet, if a single attempt is made to raise MP salaries, I guarantee you can see the howls of outrage across educated and middle-class India. These pampered MPs and so on. The absolute truth is, either you are a well-off lawyer or somebody who's making so much money on the side you can afford to finance it, or like me, you supplement your income through, in my case, writing and very occasionally speeches to corporates, which then pay for my expenses. Or, and there's only one other option, you be corrupt and you take the money it takes you to do your job from people who essentially will then own you and for whom you'll have to do favors, as many MPs do. And I've always had, I mean, even in my ministerial days, MPs coming to me with some oily fat cat who wants some irregular favor being done. And I know that the MP's only interest in doing that is because this is the person who's bankrolling his existence. Now, do we want a politics like that? I think most of the people in this room would not. And yet, nor would anybody in this room vote for an increased salary for an MP to actually cover his legitimate expenses and leave him invulnerable to this kind of corruption. So there is deep hypocrisy in the system, I've got to say, TK, and the honest truth about this is that nobody is willing to confront it from any political party or even any non-political institution that could help reform this. There isn't one single credible campaign finance solution offered. The only one is this one of government or state financing of elections, but that'll change nothing. People will pocket the state's money and make more money on the side to run their campaigns. It will not change anything.
Yeah. Well, all democracies start being corrupt, then over time they clean up. I hope
that's the US precedent everyone points to.
Yeah.
The Gilded Age. It used to be said that the only thing that Standard Oil didn't do for the Pennsylvania legislature was to refine it. So we can say that similar things about some of our...
Yeah. Coming to another key thing that you said about our culture accepting theological diversity. There is nothing called deviance. We accept different ways of pursuit. Now, while this is good to say, there is a thin line from this to trying to mobilize political support by pampering certain influential sections of minority communities. Now, one major charge that has been leveled against the Congress party is that it appeases minorities. Now, you are from Kerala. There have been Christians in Kerala for more than 2,000 years. There have been Muslims in Kerala from the century in which Islam was founded. They lived there on the patronage of the king. But in India, minorities do not live on anybody's patronage. They live because of their democratic rights. They are part of the constitution which guides them democracy. But if your existence as a minority is based on democracy, you are also duty-bound to accept democratic norms for all sections of your society. If you say women cannot enjoy a democratic right, should mainstream political parties side with democracy or with these traditional old conservatives who want to control their community by suppressing democracy and rights for women?
Well, I have absolutely no doubt about my own answer to that, which is that the real test is not culture but coercion. In other words, I have to grant those Muslims, for example, who wish to live under Islamic Sharia law, the right to do so, both under our constitution and under the prevailing Muslim personal laws. But equally, I will stand up for the right of any individual Muslim to opt out of that. As a citizen of democratic India, if an Indian Muslim woman says, no, I don't want to follow Sharia law, I don't want to get married under Sharia law, I don't want to be divorced by my husband under Sharia law, I want to have the existing civil registration procedures that are legally available to me. It is her right as a citizen of India to demand that, and it is our duty, if we are in the government, to protect that right. On that, I'm completely clear.
Now, you didn't touch upon this part of our collective existence as a progressive nation. We have always been strategically autonomous. We have no patron in the world, not the US, not the Soviet Union, or now Russia, not China. We have hostile neighbors. Now there is an increasing tendency in strategic circles to say, this will no longer work, that we should clearly opt for siding with one camp or the other. What do you think of it?
I don't agree with that. I think that there's a lot to be said for preserving our flexibility of options. I floated this theory, which never took any traction, that we move beyond non-alignment to multi-alignment. By which I meant, if you look at the world today, look, our foreign minister, right, every year meets with her Russian and Chinese counterparts in RIC. Then she adds the Brazilians and South Africans for an annual meeting of BRICS. Then she sort of kicks out the Russians and she meets with the others in BASIC for environmental negotiations. Then she kicks out the Chinese and the Russians and she meets with Brazil and South Africa in IPSA for South-South cooperation. And all these different forums are valid means of India pursuing its interests, and India is useful to all of them, not merely because our name happens to begin with that vital element in any acronym, a vowel, so that you can't pronounce BRICS or IPSA without India, but also because we actually are making a difference there. This kind of multi-alignment, we're pursuing a permanent seat in the United Nations, we're also focused on our immediate neighborhood. We're in the non-aligned movement, decrying the excesses of the neo-colonialist countries, the ones who oppressed us for 200 years, but we're also in the community of democracies alongside those very countries. We are part of the G77, the global trade union at the United Nations of developing countries, but we're also in the G20, the macro management of the global economy. So this kind of multi-alignment is the way forward for India. Today, global relationships have got to be seen like the World Wide Web. There's this network of connections. Some overlap, some don't overlap. I'm connected to you for one thing, I'm connected to her for something else, I'm connected to him for a third thing. You two may or may not be connected. That's the way the world is today. And that is a perfect metaphor for the way international relations also should work. I would not lock myself into only one relationship. I'd want to keep them all.
Thank you. The questions from the floor. I was told that last time I did not take any questions from this side. Yeah.
You've got this blockage against the right, is it? Okay.
Thanks very much. Dr. Tharoor, thank you for sharing your vision for a progressive India with us.
Thank you.
If there was that one piece of advice you would like to give the youth or professionals like me who share your vision, who want to contribute to the development of public policy without getting pulled into the quagmire of politics, what would that be?
Yeah, I don't blame you for not wanting to get mixed up in politics. But the fact is that educated young people can actually do everything short of that. You can, for one thing, start contributing by articulating ideas, doing the necessary research, reflecting your own experience and that of others, collecting data, all of that, to inform the politicians who will actually act on it. You can certainly hold politicians accountable when they come to their constituencies, wherever you happen to live. Go and question them, ask to meet them, challenge them as necessary. You can also definitely play a role in using the existing mechanisms of our civil society and our government, whether it's the RTI petition if it's a serious enough issue, whether it's a letter to the editor if it's just a question of venting something you feel, whether it's an email to your MP or your MLA. All of these options are available to influence. I receive a lot of messages every day from constituents and sometimes from people who I'm not even sure are constituents. They're emailing me from God knows where, but their ideas force me to be on my toes, and very often they help make a difference. I mean, just yesterday, for example, some young people had written to me about their frustrations with a particular train in my constituency that has been chronically running late for several days, and they tried every method, nothing had worked. They wrote to me, I issued a tweet and I wrote to the railway authorities. Within hours, we got an immediate response promising to fix the problem. Within 24 hours, the train is still running late, but at least they're on record as saying that it will be fixed within a day or two. So in other words, there are ways in which you can influence policy without having to go and be a politician or go on dharnas or participate in the, as you call it, the mire of politics. So please do all of that, but above all, just care. Keep yourself informed, articulate your views, put your voice in.
And get trolled by the bugs, like they comment you like crazy.
Just one question, sir. Where did we liberals go wrong?
Where did?
Where, in, where did we liberals go wrong?
Where did the who go wrong? I can't hear that word.
The liberals.
The liberals. Where did we go wrong? We lost.
Why have we suddenly become pseudo-secularism and this anti-nationals and all this? I mean,
If you can hold the mic a bit closer to you, it'll be so much better.
why we suddenly become pseudo-secularists and anti-nationalism? I mean, and there seems to be nothing that seems to be working.
I think you've raised a genuine question that has caused anguish to a lot of very sincere, well-meaning people. The liberal idea perhaps became a bit complacent. We kind of took it for granted that everything we believed and did was virtuous, that ours was a superior idea, that the kind of vision of India on which we were acting, the idea of India I summarized today, was so self-evidently the right one that it would continue to prevail. And I think particularly after the election victory of 2009, which was my first election, but many people who had won in 2004 a little more unexpectedly, won more easily in 2009, began to feel that the only way was up. And I think that complacency that set in. I remember Rahul Gandhi was in Berkeley a couple of months ago. He basically admitted that, if you like, the sort of people running the liberal agenda stopped trying. And that, I think, is where the shock of 2014 was necessary to administer, though God knows we never expected it to be quite so bad, that not only was the Congress and other liberal voices defeated, but they were almost silenced. To come down to 44 in the Lok Sabha was below the worst projections of anybody, even the greatest pessimists amongst us. But I think one good thing about seeing you see, very frankly, if you were a Machiavelli or a Chanakya in the BJP camp, you would have spent the first mandate, 2014, essentially focused on economic growth, on doing the right thing, on running an efficient government, even on technocracy. And then you would have perhaps been able to advance your ideas when you were completely entrenched across the country. Fortunately for liberals, they revealed their true colors from the very start. And all the stuff that I was talking about at the beginning of my speech is out there staring all of us in the face. Every day somebody comes up to me saying, I'm sorry to tell you I voted for the BJP last time. I won't make that mistake again because this is not what I voted for. This has been the big mistake the BJP has made. If we made the mistake of complacency, they have made the mistake of arrogance. They think that because of that majority, they can do what they like, show their true colors, and the nation will love it. Well, I don't think the nation's loving it, and I do believe the liberals, sobered, wiser, will come back.
Good evening, Dr. Tharoor. As rightly said, that information is power, yet we are constantly fed with biased media houses, no matter which camp they belong to. You yourself has been a victim to that. How can the system or the government ensure that we can access free media, unbiased media, who can provide us with the correct information so that we can make right decisions?
You know, your question itself contains the trap. You say, how can the government ensure? Government's job is not to ensure that. We as civil society have to support a credible free media. The truth is that very often the media shelters behind the excuse that they're giving people what they want. So when you decry, as I have often done, the sensationalism, voyeurism, lack of professionalism, lack of research or fact-checking that is rampant in our media, particularly our television news channels, the answer is, look at our TRPs. This is what people want. And in fact, often the worst offenders are the ones with the highest TRPs. So ultimately, when you say, what can the government do? The government probably is not inclined to do it. Especially as is the case today, they're the beneficiaries of this kind of media. Why would they want to curb it or to strengthen its independence? The other problem in India is that a lot of our media is owned by people who have other business interests. So that you don't even need to directly attack the media. You just basically tell the owners, oh, I see. So yes, of course, you had that tax request pending, right? We'll see about that. And that'll be enough to get you good coverage if you're in the government. I mean, these are things that widely are reported to be happening, and it's genuinely worrying. We've seen independent media sites taking articles off the web, presumably after having received a phone call. Articles that have appeared on the web briefly and a few hours later disappear. There have been 4 or 5 such instances in the last year, and every one of those articles have been articles critical of the government or of somebody close to and influential in the government. Now, these are the kinds of things that are dismaying, because the purpose of a free press is for all of us, irrespective of our political affiliation. What that free press does, it is the mortar that holds together the bricks of our freedom, and it's also the open window embedded in those bricks. And if we don't have that open window and no fresh air comes in, we will all suffocate.
Focusing on the blueprints of New India, so what do you think are 2 or 3 crucial points where, that needs attention, like immediate attention, need of the hour? So, any thoughts on that?
I mentioned them in my speech. I think jobs is absolutely fundamental, particularly jobs for young people. And we have to try every conceivable route in terms of government support for actually creating jobs. The government's Make in India campaign is not in itself wrong. It's just unfortunately terribly ill-timed, because they're going around the world asking companies to make in India when those companies may be making more and more things not with human beings anywhere but with robots. It's striking that the flagship announcement of Make in India was Foxconn's announcement with Mr. Modi of a $3 billion investment. That was 3 years ago. We have not seen one nail being driven into a ground yet. I don't think a penny of that $3 billion is ever going to come, despite the announcement. So Make in India isn't going to happen in the kind of scale that the government is talking about. In fact, I think in the last session, TK was telling Jayant about the objective of 25% of our GDP coming out of manufacturing. It ain't going to happen, as the Americans say. So how else can we do it? I've been a strong advocate, for example, of massive investment in tourism. There are global studies showing that $1,000 invested in tourism will generate 8 times more jobs than the same $1,000 in industry. And yet successive governments, including my own, have not seized this opportunity enough. I have been shouting myself blue in the face about this because the evidence is overwhelming. And we have such magnificent sites we can show tourists by comparison with the kind of stuff we all pay money to see abroad, which is not even a fraction of what we can offer. But the infrastructure around it is so hopeless that nobody's going to want to come to our sites. So we have to invest in tourism. We have to create more budget hotels, better facilities, more flight connections. There are 1,000 things we need to be doing in order, for example, to generate jobs in tourism, because tourism absorbs skilled as well as unskilled and semi-skilled people of all ages and all levels. That's one example, but jobs is clearly number one. Number two is obviously we have to do a lot more about skill development generally. I think that it's not enough to have a ministry. That ministry has made very, very negligible progress. I think there has to be a very serious challenge to the private sector. Why aren't they involved in skill development? They can hire the best of the graduates themselves. I would say that we could, just as we passed a law saying that you have to spend 2% of your gross profits in CSR, why can't we pass a law that obliges every company past a certain threshold to create a skill development center in its own areas of competence and train people? We are in a society where if you want to be a potter or a cobbler, you better have a father or an uncle who's a potter or a cobbler, because nobody else is going to teach you, right? Everything comes down the gene pool. That's how the caste system grew. Well, we have to break free of that. So all of these, there are more examples to be given, but we're running short of time. Essentially, jobs, skill development, obviously the entire education system needs to be fixed very seriously, and so on. Plenty of things we need to do. But we need to do it in this vision of including everyone. So one last one.
I'm afraid we have to close this session now. If you are lucky enough to grab him as he
good
goes
evening.
out, you can ask him.
I would like to... No, sorry, we are short of time. I would like to thank Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
It's only 5:10. No? We're supposed to go until 5:15, and we began a couple of minutes later. Why don't we take one last
May I
question?
ask
So
the
many
last
hands.
final question here? Hello?
Last couple of questions. The discourse is getting cheapened. Well, the question is, she says that she's frequently attacked and trolled by people from, let's put it, the illiberal tendency, and that she is tempted to react equally unpleasantly and violently, but that undermines her liberal principles. What should she do? I mean, the fact is that obviously the principle of give as good as you get is not necessarily liberal or illiberal. It's just a question of maybe we need to sock it to people sometimes. I get
Sir, I've got a
exasperated
question.
too. Somebody's got a
Yeah,
No.
sir. May I ask a question,
Sorry,
sir?
but we won't be.
Who has the mic?
entertaining
The
anymore.
last
Yes,
question.
yes.
Who has the mic?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Somebody with the mic will be heard.
Firstly, thank you very much for the lecture. It was very insightful. What I would really like to ask you is, what do you think? You were talking about, how, there's been a sudden change in the last 3.5 years since this particular government came into power. So what do you think should be the roadmap? What do you think should, the liberals do so that they can win again, or the Congress party in particular should do to win again in times to come?
There's a lot to be done, but very simply, we have to make it very clear what we stand for, which I've tried to do today, articulate what we believe in, repeat it consistently from the very top, energize ourselves at the grassroots, because politics can't only be about winning elections, it's also got to be about what goes on between elections. That is, good politics is a form of social service. It's your political workers being out there to help the old lady fill in a government form, to report someone to the cops if somebody has broken into somebody's home, to do the kind of daily stuff, helping people get their BPL cards, their ration cards. There's all sorts of basic level stuff that our ordinary folks need help with, that political parties can help them provide. We need to go back to that old system of politics as social service and energize ourselves, and we have to keep spreading our ideas in every available forum such as this one.
Thank you, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Thank you for being with us today. I would also like to thank Arun. Thank you.